Greetings, devout listeners of Ghosts in the Mountains. Caleb here, and I wanted to let you all know that there will be a small change to the show going forward. Dr. Captain Burgess and I have decided that we're not going to bleep out the F-bombs anymore, because hey, who the are we kidding? Okay, I bleeped that one out, but going forward, no more bleeping of the F-bombs. Because, I mean, come on, you guys know what we're saying. Austin and I are a bunch of foul-mouthed old punk rockers, so it's only fitting. But that said, sorry for anybody that doesn't like cursing, but we are what we are, and we're not trying to be anybody else. So with that down, we hope you continue listening to Ghosts in the Mountains, and we hope you enjoy this next episode.
The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains.
Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. I am your host, as always, Caleb Hanks, and I tell you what, I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Dr. Captain Burgess. How are you this evening?
I think people gather that by now, but I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
No, they are going to listen to me ask you how you are on every damn episode. They're going to like it.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on, but I do not feel like we're alone tonight, dude.
Really? You sense the presence of others.
I do. Show yourselves, you cowards. Oh, my God. All right. So you guys saw the episode title, but we are joined tonight by a very ragtag group of miscreants and wonderful folk that are just incredible in their depths of knowledge in their own fields. Tonight we are joined by Micah Hanks, the brother. Micah, how are you tonight?
Long time no see.
I know. It's been, mere seconds. And Micah is puppeteering one of my Bucky's plushies.
Yeah, this little guy, it's funny because they talk about sometimes when you go into an environment and a presence attaches itself to you. That happened tonight. This little guy, this beautiful little beaver right here, just found his way right over here into the studio with us. And I said, hey, little pal, you want to hang out? Now, you got to behave. You got to be good. Listen, you might learn something. And he looked me in the eye, with that little twinkle, and he went, Bucky! And I said, all right, man, you're in. So,
which in his foreign language means, shove your hand up my butt and make me speak. But Bucky is not the only other supernatural creature here in this room, because we are joined by longtime caller, first-time listener, Mr. Jon Kaufman. Brother, how the hell are you this wonderful evening?
I'm doing great. I'm just here to, share the love and love the beaver and have a great conversation.
Dude,
well, he's excited, yeah.
So tonight we are going to be going into a modicum of different, strange, wild paranormal threads because Mr. Kaufman and his lovely wife, who you'll probably hear her giggling here and there, but if she ever wants to jump on the mic, you go for it, because it's right there. But we didn't have enough mic inputs, so sorry, it's weird. We wanted to give you your own mic.
Only weird for you.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly.
No, that's okay. We can share, right?
So anyway, tonight we are going to be talking about a modicum of different weird, random things, because as things tend to go, John and Amanda have decided that this is the point in their life where they need to pull a Joe Rogan and get every one of their friends and family to move to North Carolina. And we could not be more excited for you guys to be part of the fold and be drawn in by the crystal energy that sucks people into North Carolina and super glues their ass cheeks to this beautiful, beautiful part of the country. So we're welcoming you
all to this area. And every time we get together, which we've met across the country at this point multiple times, we end up just going down the deep, dark rabbit holes of the strangest shit we could ever possibly talk about. Austin and I do a very fair amount of that on this show as it is.
Here and there.
But you also can't be brothers with Micah Hanks, who introduced me to John and Amanda, and not end up just going into the darkest recesses of what we would like to just call a blanket statement, the paranormal. I know you don't love that term, Micah, but, well, let's call a spade because it is beyond normal. So Micah has elected to call this episode The Others.
Let's go down the list of interpretations of non-human intelligence. That idea, I term it the others, whatever it is, others which may or may not exist, right? Others which may be items of folklore, others which may be, personal experiences people have had or claim to have had, others which might account for, whatever the phenomenon is behind or the operators behind the UFO phenomenon, for all we know. This is an idea that is as old as time. It's an idea that's been with humans, and really, one might argue that, really an integral part of being human is to recognize the concept of, what would it be like to be an intelligence that isn't human, right? What would it be like to think about the world or to experience the world if you weren't a person? And so, this is something that we see. It's an archetype that's in our folklore and all of our stories, our traditions. The idea of whether you call them fairy folk, beings, shadows, specters,
The Fae,
sages, Sasquatch. All these different things, this concept of are there others in our existence? That really to me is, again, for what people like to call the paranormal, at the heart of all that is really the search for, are there things out there that are beyond our known daily experience, and are some of them non-human and intelligent? So, that's the general premise. And, this could take a different, range of different, manifestations. Think about, for instance, the concept of aliens. But again, one might also apply the notion of interdimensionals. And then there's the question of, well, how do you access the plane or whatever it is where those intelligences inhabit?
Well, Stephen Greer can tell you all about that.
I'm sure he could. But now the Dr. Captain, in articles you've been writing recently, you're looking at psilocybin and DMT and how people have used entheogens to try and access that realm of thinking.
Yeah.
Right?
Picked up on that a little bit.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, of course, obviously, I used to follow that beat too, young man. So long story short, there are a range of different interpretations of what it all means, how it could be accessed, whether it's real or not, or if it indeed is something that stems from the human consciousness. But it's funny to me that innate to being human is that greatest question of, are we alone? So what are the manifestations of that? What are the ways we could encounter non-human intelligence? What might they be? How are they interpreted? What does all that mean? That's really kind of the idea. And I told Caleb all this last night, and he said, all right, whatever.
Sounds great. Well, honestly, man, the thing that's kind of been on my mind a bit recently. So there's been a big shakeup in the world of Sasquatch because there's a new documentary coming out that boasts essentially that they are disproving once and for all the famed Patterson-Gimlin film. That, to me, is some pretty incredible paradigm-shifting shit because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people out there that are, as far as I've seen on Reddit and certain things like that, just unwilling to accept that Patterson-Gimlin could be fake because, they've just devoted themselves to this video. You and I, Micah, we have sat there and we've watched that damn thing time and time and time again. And there was a certain point where I was finally watching that thing and I just saw a little something that kind of made my eyebrows perk up. And I'm like, I see what I thought was a crease in the hind leg and the thigh area. And we've talked about this for years before this. Whatever this documentary is, I haven't seen this footage. I don't know. It could all be bullshit. But I have thought for quite some time that the Patterson-Gimlin film was, unfortunately, a pretty convincing looking hoax. So whenever this documentary comes out, there's a lot of people unwilling to accept what is potentially indicated in this. There are so many people that it's like, that is the piece of evidence, It's the thing that makes them believe that Bigfoot is real. I don't have a problem with Patterson-Gimlin being fake. And the thing that we were also talking about is just because Patterson-Gimlin might not be real does not mean that the entire phenomenon is bullshit. Mike, I want to get your thoughts on that because, I mean, you probably more than anyone I've ever known have looked into this phenomena. You have presented to me some of the most absolutely batshit evidence, I guess you could call it, but just like lore, people talking about this for the longest time. I mean, like, what's your just like go-to take on what might be happening in the world of Sasquatch research post whatever this might be like blowing the lid off this whole thing?
Certainly. I'm happy to comment on that. Of course, I'd love to get the opinions of everybody else here. We've got an expert panel, one might say. Now, for me, when it comes to Sasquatch and how you approach this topic, many people, they live and they die by the Patterson-Gimlin film. That's the best evidence, they would have said, and some still say. And that is therefore the representation of what these things are supposed to look like, and therefore we can base our judgments about their whatever their physical features are, their anatomy and everything based on what we can see in that film.
Or it being a interdimensional thing that phase shifts into our universe here and there.
I've heard people make that argument, and they have used what they see in that film as the basis for that argument,
which is weird to me.
Well, what it really seems to suggest to me is that we're looking at something that's more like an ink blot test.
Yeah,
it is something that people, when they look at that film and they see that film, it means to them whatever they kind of want Sasquatch to be. Skeptics say that's a man in a monkey suit. Obviously, how can people not see that? But again, I knew Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, the late Dr. Meldrum, pretty well. And, I did one lengthy interview with him, and then he and I had several, phone calls and Zoom calls, I guess, that were, part of, professional groups that would gather and talk about these things, but there would be a lot of us on the call, and he and I would have some direct interactions that were off the mic. These weren't interviews, and we would talk about all these things. Now, it's interesting because the late Dr. Meldrum, he could be very skeptical at times. You could put ideas out there on the table and he'd say, well, not so fast, hold on. But he very much believed that film was the real deal. The latest claims regarding this new film, which was premiered recently at South by Southwest, are essentially this, that there was a new film that had been made back in the 1960s but had not been released, and it was in the collections of a professor whose a family member had provided this to the filmmaker. They have now shown this film, and they say that what it appears, this recovered footage, it had not been developed previously, but once it was developed, it clearly shows what appears to be a test run for a Patterson-Gimlin film type scenario involving a less well-developed and less convincing-looking ape costume. And so the idea is essentially, okay, well, so this is, test run A.
It was a Buc-ee's onesie.
Yeah, and then the final form, we might say, was what we have seen in the famous film from 1967 there in Bluff Creek, California. Now, in my opinion, like you said, that's not really all that controversial. Let me point out a couple of things briefly.
Yeah.
It had already been known that there were problems with trying to reconcile how they would have developed that film in the weekend between when Patterson and Gimlin claimed that they filmed it and then the Monday morning when they had already been at a radio station with the developed film showing it. They had allegedly gotten it developed over the weekend, but there weren't any film labs over the weekend that were open in that area that could have done it. And so the question came down to, well, who could have developed this? And they said, well, it was a private lab or something that they'd taken it to. That always remained a sticking point. And many researchers looked into that, and they could never really reconcile that and determine if the film had even been developed that weekend or could have been. But if it hadn't been, that meant that it had to have been developed before when they said it was filmed, which, of course, is a huge issue because that seems to suggest the film had been made before the time, the clear time frame in which Patterson and Gimlin said, we were there that Friday night and this is when we made the film, and by Monday morning we had it developed and ready to show.
Was it filmed on Super 8?
I believe that was Kodachrome 16 millimeter, I believe.
And like go-to photo labs that you just go get your pictures developed at, they would develop that for you?
Yeah.
That's wild. I didn't even realize that they would do film that way.
Yeah. So again, these days, everybody can film 24 frame per second, high quality video.
Yeah.
On their smartphones. Back in those days, as Patterson did, he had to go and actually rent a camera And I think that, in fact, actually, he kept the camera longer than he was supposed to, and so they tried to sue him, over keeping the camera, theft, technically, because he had.
We know you were out there filming Sasquatch, you butthole.
Yeah, I mean, so there were all these issues, and many pointed to this, and they said that those questions about the provenance of the film and the time frame in terms of how it was made and when it was developed, and the questions about him keeping the camera for too long, and other questions about Patterson's past, people have already pointed to all this for years and said there was a whole lot of dirt. There were a whole lot of questions. But then you also take into consideration that in recent years, it was James Bobo Fay, of course, one of the stars of Finding Bigfoot, but also one of the co-hosts with Cliff Barrickman, our friends, of the Bigfoot and Beyond podcast. So I know Cliff quite well, and I've met Bobo a few times. We've spoken also on something. I've been on their show, And Bobo had pointed out years ago that there were these odd statements that Bob Gimlin had made.
Yeah.
Bob Gimlin had been making these veiled statements about a cowboy promise that he'd made to Roger Patterson.
That's what I was bringing up to you the other night, because I was saying it's just like, what the hell in the context of a Bigfoot video? Let's just say for the sake of discussion right now that Patterson-Gimlin film is legit and that was actually a Sasquatch. Where does a cowboy promise come into the picture?
That's what Bobo said. And,
Yeah.
there were others that were talking about this too. And, my colleagues, Matt Pruitt and I and Cliff and, Bobo and others, had at times addressed that. And Matt and I had tried to reconcile that in terms of what we know and what we didn't know about the film. Finally, that brings us to something that was a real game changer for me, because, actually, after the conversations with Dr. Meldrum, I had gotten to a point where I was pretty well, ready to accept. And, John knows this because around the same time, you and I were first having video chats there during COVID that I had that talk with Dr. Meldrum. And at that point, Meldrum gave such a good breakdown of the anatomy. And one of the key features to me that really stood out was he pointed to the trackway that they, actually have photographs of, because Lyle Laverty, a U.S. Forest Service employee, had gone out there and taken photographs of the trackway. And, some of them seem to show this kind of crease, that crest, or not a crest, it's the mid-tarsal break is what they refer to this as. But there was this sort of a crease in the foot in some of the tracks that were seen there at Bluff Creek. And so Laverty had taken photographs. They attempted to also make some castings. Meldrum examined those castings, had copies of those, might have had the originals, but he also had done 3D models of those and made those available online. Now, when he went to China, he met a man who had allegedly seen the Chinese wild man, the Yeren.
Allegedly.
And when he saw this, he says that the man told him that the footprints had this crease in the middle, and for Meldrum, that sealed it. He said, there's no way that the American creature, if this is like a descendant of Gigantopithecus, and it has that key anatomical, characteristic on the foot, there's no way that in North America it could have that, and in China it could have that. And this guy had no idea about this, but he randomly tells me, oh yeah, there's this weird thing in the foot, and I knew exactly anatomically what he was talking about. So, right. Talking with Meldrum about this, I even had come back around to saying, well, we'll never really know with the film, and it's never going to be 100% provable. But if it's real, basing our judgment on that, could we learn some things from that film? So, that's kind of where I stood. But I'd been saying for years, we won't ever be able to prove that that is Sasquatch, or to prove that if the film, can't be proven, that Sasquatch exists based on that film if it remains in question, right?
Right.
So a couple of years ago, I get this email from a scientist. I won't name that individual. They contacted me in confidence and kind of, concerned about talking about this. But they essentially said, look, we knew in Yakima all about this and that this was a hoax. And I knew Al Diatley's family, and people knew all about this in our community. And I talked with some of the family members, and they all laughed about it. And some of them were actually embarrassed because they knew that this had all just been a hoax. And so the scientist, he reached out to me and he said, all I want is the truth. He said, I'm not actually against the idea that Sasquatch could exist, but if this film misrepresents that whole idea and is a hoax, it needs to be exposed as a hoax. And I actually agreed with him.
Oh, hell yeah, dude.
So I'd shared that with a few, colleagues, just a mention. He asked me, of course, not to, provide his name or to send this email to anybody. So I kept that in confidence, but I would tell people, look, I have a source I have spoken to who pretty convincingly lays out the case after all these years that this is not a real, biological specimen in that film. So when the news about this new documentary came out, I wasn't really surprised. And again, it's kind of like what you just said. I would love everybody else's thoughts on this. But again, in the context of the idea of, are there human-like beings in our midst that could exist? That scientist who wrote to me, he said, I'm not opposed to the idea that these creatures could exist. In the media coverage recently, people are saying, how are people going to accept that the whole idea of Sasquatch is nonsense now that this film has been debunked? And I'm thinking, nothing about that film being a hoax necessarily means or precludes the idea that there could be a non-human anthropoid ape, a bipedal primate that, either did exist at one time or, again, even as unlikely as it seems, might still exist. Doesn't preclude the possibility at all. That's where people start getting into this weird binary thinking.
But it's also bullshit clickbait headlines, because if you say some divisive shit that is going to look at a community of people that have been really looking into Sasquatch for the longest time, and then your headline says, now that Patterson-Gimlin has been confirmed to be a hoax, Bigfoot is not real.
It's not like, just the headlines, though. I mean, even in the body of the article, people are saying, and I've seen popular skeptics taking to social media and pointing out, they're like, the only way we can account for the fact that there are no bones, there are no bodies, there's no crap, there's no environmental DNA. Clearly, this thing does not exist. But I'm thinking, but what about the centuries of information describing large, human-like anthropoid apes? I would like Jon Kaufman's perspective on this, because I've been running my mouth. But I mean, to me, I'm not convinced. And yeah, I know there's the whole debate about evidence of absence, right? Or absence of evidence. But in my opinion, based on the wealth of, and we can get into that if you want later. But I mean, to me, looking at the wealth of data, cultural traditions, indigenous American traditions, eyewitness reports by government employees in their line of work who have said that while I was on duty in Yellowstone Park, I saw this thing. I find it extremely hard to believe that this is all just a myth that stemmed from a goofy movie from 1967. The movie was inspired by the myth, not the other way around.
Well, Sasquatch is in a goofy movie.
Yes, he is.
If you do remember. And those kick-ass songs from Powerline. Listen, if you're 62 episodes into Ghosts in the Mountains and you don't know this already, I am a shitty host. But let me tell you why. We just rambled for 25 minutes about Bigfoot before we even explained why the fuck Jon Kaufman's on the episode.
and Micah prepared a whole topic list, and we just went down one that was not on the list whatsoever. So I've been like, where are we going with this one?
Half the episode. I do like that we are talking about Bigfoot in the context of this idea of the others, because, again, there's so many questions as to what the hell that thing is, because all these people, like you said, have seen it. People that are government workers, people that are park rangers, people that have reputations that they put on the line to speak publicly about that. But where is the poop? Where's the poop? Where are the bones? Where are the teeth? John, what I'd like for you to give us and the audience a little bit is just, can you tell us a little bit about like who you are, what your background is, like how you got interested in this stuff, and how your wonderful wife, Amanda, hit Micah up and forced you all to meet? Because I'm really glad that she reached out to Micah, because the first time I ever met you guys, I was like, well, they're in this close circle.
This is a long story. We'll try to make it short. But I would say my education is actually in a combination of biology and anthropology. I spent my life in finance and technology, but my education was in physical anthropology. So essentially the study of human remains and all of the ways that we can understand that better. I've been a fan of Micah's for a long time because he had a very scientific mindset about this. And I think that, and Amanda is an amazing, energetic force of nature who connected me with Micah. She knew I was a fan of his and all of his podcasts for so long because he shares a similar scientific mindset, and as do you, Caleb and Austin. And so she was just relentless and connected with Micah and hooked me up with a conversation with Micah on his birthday when I had been this silent lurker. And so it was a super cool birthday surprise for me to hang out with Micah. And we have all obviously since become fast friends.
Yeah.
And but I just want to add on to what Micah's saying about the doubters saying about the Patterson-Gimlin film. Like, I think it's a good opportunity because we have when you think about the preservation of human remains, And the preservation of any remains, it's a really tough thing to do, and it's a really rare thing to have a fossilized anything.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the worst possible places to have any kind of remains preserved, it would be arboreal forests. That's like northern forests, northern wet forests. And where is the most likely place that we have Bigfoot? We've got the Northwest, a wet, literally a rainforest in the north.
Is that because of the acidity of all of the vegetation in the area was erode that shit?
Yes, and because there are all kinds of organisms that will devour you, whether it's a wolf or a coyote, a raccoon, a porcupine, you name the animal, down to funguses and flies and everything else. There's all kinds of life that will reabsorb you.
Yeah.
And very quickly. And so the idea that we would find remains, that's the absence of evidence, or the evidence of absence isn't the absence of evidence. It's the other way around.
Yeah.
But when you're missing evidence, it doesn't prove that nothing happened. We're also not trying to prove anything with Patterson-Gimlin, right? Like, you can look at it, and if people don't believe that, then all that it was this thing for people to cling to and believe. And removing that is actually beautiful, because what Micah was doing for us last night when we were all having this chat was, and I'd love him to recount some of these things if y'all are open to it, because I think when Patterson-Gimlin goes away, then it kind of pulls out this token, this totem that people had held up, that this was the proof. And if this isn't the proof, well, that's it then, because that's when we all found out about this, right?
Yeah.
But maybe it's not, and maybe there is a ton of additional, we'll call it anecdotal evidence, or at least anecdotal data stories that tell us that there has been a phenomenon occurring that's really similar to this for a really long time.
So when we were having dinner last night and we were talking about this, I was just saying, like, in the event that whatever this documentary is showing is actually blowing the lid off the Patterson-Gimlin film, and this thing is showing that this was a hoax, definitively, once and for all, that's book is closed. I am like so excited about that, because, okay, we know what this was. Let's move on. Let's focus our energy and our excitement and our effort and our knowledge on other aspects of the phenomenon. Let's be done with one side of it. That's okay. We can move on from that shit. It's actually really good that we do. Austin, man, I mean, I know that you like look into the Bigfoot phenomena, maybe not as much as the UFO stuff.
This is probably the one that I have the least valuable opinion on. So I didn't even know this movie was coming out. So all this has been news to me.
That's exciting to hear, though, man. But I mean, like, you've seen the Patterson-Gimlin film multiple times, obviously.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what was your take on it when you saw it, then seeing it like as an adult, maybe looking at it with a little bit more analytical eye? Did you really think that much about it?
I don't know. I think looking at it in this context, with it being allegedly disproved, essentially, from what I understand from what you've said, my thoughts on this are, so many people point to that as the definitive proof of evidence. And once you remove that, I could see how it adds doubt into people's minds, because that was the one thing that you could point to. Sure, you have footprints. Sure, you have whatever you want to call it, markings on trees, other maybe evidence that's left behind. But as far as photographic or video evidence, that really was what so many people pointed to and used as justification for there is a Sasquatch, there is a Bigfoot. So I understand how that's going to completely kind of throw some people's opinions off that previous line of thinking just a little bit. But I completely agree with what both of you have said, that just because you remove what is perceived as this piece of evidence doesn't mean that it's not something that it could exist otherwise.
Yeah. And you, Micah, decided that we were going to call this thing The Others. And I think that we've spent a good amount of time on Bigfoot. I think we should move on to some of the others. Some of the just strange, anomalous, metaphysical, I don't know, interdimensional, weird beings. I mean, Micah, you had a huge string of things that you wanted to talk about on this episode. Outside of the Bigfoot stuff, which we, in some ways I just feel like we beat the damn thing to death. But, in that line of thinking of like, okay, is it a cryptid? Is it interdimensional? Out of all of this stuff, like, what is next on your list of things that you would consider one of the others that's just bizarre and any of that shit?
Well, while we're on this topic, kind of a good bridge from the Bigfoot topic to the others would be the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, I think.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Oh, sure. And I'll just add also, again, actually, I think Sasquatch is a great place to start. You might as well, let's start with terrestrial organisms as we would presume Sasquatch to be. There are some, again, who say, nah, this thing's far too strange. It must be interdimensional. look, I don't know. But where I start, again, this is like what John was talking about, like the scientific mindset. There are some scientists out there who would say there's nothing scientific about how Micah Hanks thinks.
Well, fuck them.
I would respectfully differ. And actually, the funny thing is, I communicate with scientists daily.
Yeah, dude.
Who, some of them, I'll give you an example. There's a scientist right now who I won't name just out of respect because he didn't come, publicly, you didn't come forward and say this. But in a private communication with me, this is a scientist who is right now essentially being viewed as one of the most staunch skeptics in a certain discipline of the sciences. And the reason why is because he's published a very controversial science paper challenging some findings from close to half a century ago. And he's saying, I doubt this, and I think that I have found evidence that refutes a earlier hypothesis. So he's being viewed by many establishment scientists right now as a skeptic, and some skeptics are embracing him. Some who are more kind of within the paradigm of this. I might give too much away by saying this, but I'll say this is all occurring in archaeology science, anthropology and archaeology right now.
Yeah.
And this scientist reached out to me, and he basically just said, you might find this interesting to know. Despite the position I take on this in terms of archaeology and what I think the data says, he says, many see me as a skeptic on that, but I'm actually very interested in UFOs. And I said, actually, that's not that strange to me at all, because I hear from scientists all the time who privately have an interest in this. And he said, I'm just very anti-establishment in my thinking, I guess is how he termed it. And he said, if the establishment says this is the paradigm, this is the orthodoxy, and you can only operate like this, I'm naturally going to ask questions. And so I seem like a skeptic. He says, I've had orthodoxy telling me my whole life UFOs don't exist, and that is what drives me to say, there's clearly a thing here. I'm going to study this. And so he says, I haven't formally researched it. It's just an interest of mine, but he says, I'm compelled to think there's something there.
It's also hard to refute that after you have something like the documentary with Jay Stratton in it, the Age of Disclosure, because you have him, you have Marco Rubio, you have tons of people. It's like, take a politician's word for what you will.
Well, yeah, but politicians are politicians, but look, it's no secret. You and I know Jay Stratton very well, and Jay Stratton, I have had many very in-depth conversations with that man. He's highly analytical. He is an extremely, reasoned and grounded thinker.
Hell yeah.
We've talked about a lot more than just, the phenomenon. We've talked about everything from guitars to food to, history, all kinds of things. And I find him to be not only a credible individual and a trustworthy person, but somebody I just, I think that he and I think very similarly. And
he also has a bullshit meter that I think is like so incredibly fine-tuned that when you're talking to him, it's just like, you can throw out, well, just like for the sake of like conversation and speculation, like just say like this case or this case. And, Jay will just very politely, but frankly be like, nah, don't believe it.
There've been things I've said. Yeah, I've brought up ideas, and he'll be like, yeah, well, be careful about that because, he'll call bullshit. And I appreciate when people do that.
Of course, hell yes.
So again, but to your point though, in my opinion, first of all, the idea that like it's impossible that we are alone in this universe.
My ass.
I was asked recently by a producer with a television program. They say, do you think that we were talking about Dr. Avi Loeb, and they said, do you think that he is one of the only scientists who's willing to say, that we're not alone? And I was like, no, I don't think at all. I think most astronomers and astrophysicists believe there are aliens in the universe. Now, they don't think that there's good evidence that aliens have visited Earth, but I'm like, aliens, that is like not a controversial proposition at all. Now, so if we can start there and say, okay, well, we probably are not alone in the universe. The likelihood of that and the immensity of the universe with the vast expanses of the cosmos that are known to exist, with the James Webb Space Telescope peering billions of years back in time, and we look at all those, galactic, nebula and active galactic nebulae, right?
We all know that old paradigm.
We won't get at all this, but like the things that we are learning though about galaxies and galactic formation because of being able to literally look back in time thanks to the James Webb Space Telescope. It's opening new vistas for us, and we're seeing things about the universe and thinking differently about it. It's almost implausible. It's almost inconceivable that we would be alone in this universe. So
I say this shit all the time. Jon Kaufman, you're proof that aliens exist.
That's right.
Because life happened on this planet y'all.
Well, you did.
It can probably happen somewhere
It's
else.
very unlikely.
It just depends on how close you are to a star that could or could not fry your ass.
But coming back to Sasquatch for a moment, that's why I say if life could exist elsewhere, to me, it's not an unreasonable hypothesis to start right there. Non-human intelligence, I mean, I don't know how intelligent per se Sasquatch is, but let's just say if we're looking, for a starting point, the idea that there is a human-like creature that could have existed on Earth, some scientists, again, the point I was trying to make earlier is I talk to scientists all the time who are very intrigued by ideas like that, UFOs and other things. They may not publicly talk about it. Many, though, in recent years have started coming forward and saying, there once was a stigma and it was career suicide to talk about this stuff, but to hell with that, we're coming forward, we're doing it now. Well, what about the idea of alien life existing or even UFOs visiting Earth is less extraordinary than the idea of there being an anthropoid ape here on Earth? I mean, I do know some people who are like, the idea of Sasquatch, that's nonsense, but aliens, oh, hell yeah. And I'm like, do you realize how silly that is? How paradoxical your position is? The idea that a monkey could exist, there are extant apes that are non-human primates, and we see them, and we can go to the zoo and we can look at them. I mean,
yeah.
You see what I'm saying? The paleoanthropological record shows creatures that look like Sasquatch. So I'm like, the less crazy concept really is Sasquatch, but many people are more comfortable accepting the alien idea because maybe there's some chutzpah, there's some prestige with that. I don't know.
Well, I want to get Austin and John, I want to get both of your commentary on what I'm about to talk about, but like when I hear people say, I find it highly unlikely that extraterrestrials were able to get here from a far off solar system, I'm like,
based on what? How do you know? What technology?
And exactly, and that's where my
silly premise.
That is exactly where my qualm comes in, because I'm like, number one, are you actually basing this shit on our rocket
chemical
propulsion?
Rockets?
Yeah. Are you actually trying to base this on combustion engine propulsion systems?
You got to teach these folks about field propulsion.
Well, Micah, when we were at the UFO Congress in 2013 with Jason McClellan, Maureen Ellsbury, and the late great Stanton Friedman and a bunch of great people, Richard Dolan was out there that year. Ryan Sprague, we hung out with a lot from Somewhere in the Skies podcast. I love you, Ryan. I don't know if you listen, but we were talking with Mark D'Antonio, and Mark D'Antonio was always talking about, these wild ass concepts of, the gravity drives and things like that.
The Alcubierre drive.
Yeah, sure. Which I believe our buddy Travis Taylor has. It wasn't the Alcubierre drive, the thing that he was trying to remap in one of his papers?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, something like
that's
that.
The Star Trek warp drive for all you
Well,
listeners.
yeah.
That's true, yeah. That's
exactly
because right.
Dr. Travis Taylor was saying, I think I know a way to optimize this in the theoretical physics. And he wrote this paper that was like peer-reviewed, and people were like, oh, shit, the science checks out. But that's the thing. It's just like, I'm sorry. The probability that we have been visited on Earth by extraterrestrials is just not very likely. That seems like the biggest heap of shit I've ever heard in my life, because it's like, if you think about some of the theoretical propulsion systems, and they even talk about this in the Age of Disclosure documentary, where it essentially can just, I don't know, Mike, you know how to explain this stuff so much better than I do about how like the UFOs can basically just like open up a gravitic pocket and just pop through and go wherever the hell they want.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hypothesized mode of travel. I mean, we don't really. Here's the thing,
but we see these things moving in ways that we don't understand. So
right.
Again, that's what they're basing this shit on.
It seems very likely that if there are technologies behind some of these UAP, and again, there are a range of different ideas about what these things are, but now I have always kind of thought it's really hard to make an argument, despite the fact that some have tried, and not just skeptics saying these are all just weather balloons, right? I mean, there are some who've tried to say maybe plasmas could form unique, trianguloid shapes where there are three little balls of plasma that cause a refraction of light between them based on a kind of a field
that can get hit by a Tomahawk missile and just keep rolling.
Well, that could look like a big black flying triangle, at least. I mean, there are some really wild ideas that I'm just thinking, that's far out even for Star Trek,
Thinks thou doth protest too much.
Indeed. I agree, yeah. I mean, and to me, the simpler, following Occam's razor here, to me, the real skeptical approach is to follow the most likely explanation. And you look at a case like, for instance, January 5th, 2000, over southern Illinois, all these police officers saw this massive black triangle flying pretty low over southern Illinois. and they were communicating with radio dispatches. They were observing this thing. So they're describing it in real time, and, the dispatch officer's asking them, what does it look like? And one's like, it's huge. Another one says it's kind of wedge-shaped, sort of a V shape. There are 3 lights at the corners, and it's moving very slow, but then it'll speed up and it'll move quick, and then it'll slow down again. So some skeptics have tried to say it was a blimp. They just were mistaken. It was just a blimp giving a VIP tour at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, man. That happens all the time.
As you do.
I love Goodyear. They're great.
Yeah. There were...
Have you guys not done the 4 o'clock in the morning Goodyear tour?
I've been meaning to, but I'm usually asleep at 4, and so I just never, one day I'll get up and just do it, because you can see so much. You can see so much at 4 o'clock is the thing.
Yeah, I know. The views are so
It's
dark
amazing.
and beautiful.
Everybody tells me that just the perfect blackness, you feel like you're in space.
I like that they float the V-shaped one out for that one.
Yeah, they
otherwise it's a football. I like that.
That's the thing.
Well, if you listen to our friend over here off Canoga Road, Sex at Midnight.
Yeah, I've heard about him.
He saw that very same triangular-shaped blimp from Goodyear that's given the 3 o'clock in the morning tour. It's the early
Well,
shift.
to the skeptics who have, and again, just to be clear, because I don't want to sound like I'm just, talking shit, but one of the skeptics who has made that very argument, I've communicated with him, and I think he's, a nice guy, and we've had some very constructive dialogue. So I just want to be very clear. I disagree with his premise. But I think that those who make that kind of an argument, they may fail to recognize how ideological they are.
Sure.
And, I don't know if maybe if he and I were sitting and having a Guinness, alone and just chatting, if he would maybe kind of be like, okay, the blimp at 4 a.m. idea that doesn't match the character, the shape, the dynamics, or anything, maybe that didn't make as much sense. But I feel like they kind of think that they have to play a certain character. They have to toe a certain line. They're preaching already to the so-called choir that expects to hear that kind of an explanation. And again, that explanation is no better than anything that really, in fairness, many of the ufologists have put forward. Now, to me, following Occam's razor, I can go back because there was a FOIA request that was filed for that police dispatch recording, and it was released. And so you can go back and you can listen to those officers from the Millstat and from the Highland and from the Dupont and from all these different police departments in different municipalities there in Southern Illinois that morning that were on duty, and that were all like, okay, we've got that object now. I can hear them in real time describing what it looked like, how it was moving, what it appeared to resemble and what it did not appear to resemble. And I'm like, they clearly, unequivocally, while looking at it and describing in real time to that dispatch officer, they said it's a big wedge-shaped triangle object moving really slow. How do you mistake a blimp while you're looking at it for being a big triangle?
Oh, yeah, dude.
To me, that just strains credulity. And so the simpler explanation is that there was some kind of an unknown triangular vehicle in the sky that night, and a bunch of police officers saw it. Now,
which doesn't necessarily mean that it's extraterrestrial. It's just some sort of weird craft that we don't know what the hell it is.
We don't know. But in the context of this discussion that we're having here, we have to ask some very important questions. Do we have any technology like that? The simple answer is it's possible, but if it exists, it's unknown. It's off the books. It's a black world project, and that's a special access program or something that we don't have access to and we'll never know. Or if we ever do, it's going to be an official disclosure as a process of, revealing to the public like we did with the SR-71 Blackbird, the B-2 Spirit. That hasn't happened yet. So we have to assume that either this is some secret government stuff, or if it's not, then that this belongs to somebody else. And by somebody else, again, this does bring us to that question of, could it be either non-human others, or is there a way this could be explained in the context of human others? Now, again, two kind of approaches to this. You could say if it exists in the black world and this is a human technology, this is a, somebody on Earth, like a breakaway civilization or, the secret military, the black world, that's what this is. But are there other modes of thinking that could explain that too? This is a tricky one, but if we want to really cover all the bases, we could also say, okay, let's ask about time travelers. I'm not endorsing that idea, but I'm simply saying that I have looked at every possibility. And my colleague, Dr. Michael Masters, actually has what he calls the extraterrestrial hypothesis, where he actually posits, he's an anthropologist too, but he's like, I think these things actually might be time travelers. And there are some who, they endorse that approach as far as UAP. To me, I try to be as agnostic as possible. I try to be inherently skeptical and as agnostic as possible. I don't commit to any pet theories, but I examine every single one of them. And I've looked at black budgets, time travelers, cryptoterrestrials, interdimensionals,
Timeshares.
whatever these things are, I don't know. But I mean, to me, you cannot simply explain that as being a blimp giving a VIP tour at 4 a.m. That's one of the worst explanations.
Well, as crazy as this concept is, you know what's even crazier? We are 10 minutes from the 1 hour mark, which is usually our entire show. So, real quick, and we can go a little longer if we need to, and then we also do the Midnight Broadcast, which is our post show for our Patreon subscribers. But just in that same line of thinking, we'll go down the line. I'll start with you, Dr. Captain. I love that I just call you that now. When was the last time I called you Austin? Oh, yeah, the beginning of the show.
Yeah, I was going to say it's only on air.
Yeah. But when you're talking about these concepts of, extraterrestrials, the beings, not just the crafts, like the beings that people see, these little wand-wielding small people, the things that the children from the grade school in Zimbabwe claim to see. Austin, as far as you're concerned, is it really that insane that we could be visited by extraterrestrial beings that are highly more technologically capable compared to ourselves? I think I know, but where do you stand with that stuff?
No, I don't think it's insane, but I also don't think it has to be that complicated at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that jumping to the extraterrestrial hypothesis that it has to come from another planet is something that maybe has had a little bit more of a Hollywood media influence with that, because you talk about flying saucer culture and the popularization of alien civilizations in media that have kind of almost predated what is the modern UFO flap sensation to begin with. So that kind of brings it back to what we kind of alluded at, the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, which I think Mac Tonnies, I believe, wrote the book back in, I think he passed away at an early age, and the book was actually published after he passed away. But he had this whole hypothesis that there could be, almost going back to that breakaway civilization school of thought, that people, a whole other species could have existed prior to humans on Earth that have broken away, that were far more advanced than our capabilities, advanced a lot faster than we did.
Sure.
And I think there's evidence of that. You could even look at some of the archaeological findings. Like the one that kind of sticks out to me would be like something like Homo naledi, where you look at a species that is thought to be a lot more primitive, and you look at some of their behaviors and for their time and for how they advanced as a civilization through that same scale of time. They were advancing with concepts such as like burying their own and understanding kind of more advanced principles than our timeline as humans was actually catching up to. So I guess circling back to it is this whole hypothesis that Mac Tonnies was kind of really getting at, was that it's possible that there could have been a pre-human civilization that either existed, went underground, went into some form of hiding, some form of breakaway, that advanced faster than we did, and technologically at the same time advanced their technologies in a way that advanced a lot quicker than we could conceptualize as humans. And in that regards, is it that strange to think about a civilization with that kind of credentials having access to technologies like UFOs, flying saucers, things like that?
Well, the first time that I ever really started contemplating concepts like that was when, back in the day, Micah, you and I started looking into the Sanskrit and the ancient Vedic texts, and there's some weird things in there where it's almost like there's some words that are kind of describing flying machines and things like that. There's also some artwork from back in the day that just seems to depict things that maybe we would kind of lump in with the classical UFO or disc shape, or just something traveling through the sky. Maybe you could chalk those interpretations up to maybe they were just seeing some meteors or things like that. Who knows? Who knows what they were seeing? Who knows if these were just artistic interpretations? There's all kinds of different ways that you can really read into that. But John, you and I have not really gone super down the rabbit hole with the whole extraterrestrial stuff. Every time we see each other, and Amanda, you as well, it's just like the conversations they shift so quickly. But like, John, as far as you are concerned, in the regards of extraterrestrials visiting Earth, breakaway civilizations that might even exist in our fucking oceans, things like that, where does your line of thinking go in regards to the possibility of that being something that we're actually living with on this planet?
I think the hard thing for me about this phenomenon is that there's clearly something there. Like Micah was describing it for a long time. And if you look back in anecdotal evidence, there seems to be this phenomenon that's been happening for a long time that is not anything like what we have. Not like technology that we have now. It's certainly not like technology that was from 50 years ago when people were still seeing UFOs and things like that. There seems to be another out there, to the point of this show. Yeah. There seems to be another out there. And then people go to their next most natural place and they say, well, again, it's got to be the government doing secret stuff. And if they're a little bit imaginative, they say, well, then it's got to be the aliens. That's further out. It's got to be the aliens. And you look further out as far as your imagination can take you. And to me, like, I think that Jacques Vallée is a great example of somebody who let his imagination go. And I think that's really important for us if we're really seeking the truth, which is sad at first, because at first you want there to be ghosts. You want there to be UFOs, little green men. You want there to be all those things. And you realize this all could be way weirder than we think. Oh, yeah. And so if you open up your imagination to the idea of a civilization, we know the Silurian hypothesis says that 100,000 years goes by and the civilization would entirely disappear from the archaeological record. And so we know that things like that are possible. We also know that the stars are really far away and that civilizations could be really much older than us. We also know that there could be a simulation. We know that, there could be a interdimensional thing that we don't understand, and way far, or we could just keep going with those things, right? That's the rabbit hole that you can go down, and sometimes you got to pick one. But I think the important thing is to know that our imagination has only stepped one step past, if you're really imaginative, the government.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it's more weird than the government, and maybe it's way more weird than that. And so to me, It's not about what I believe. It's when I look at the evidence from a scientific perspective, what I think is the least likely thing is that it's us. It doesn't look like us. It doesn't act like us. And it did it a long time ago, which makes it less and less likely that it was us. And so then the question is just like, wow, this is the most magical thing ever. We should all be really interested in this. And how can we open up our imaginations and get to the bottom of it? Because if we don't, then all we're going to do is take that one more step, and we're going to be the Stone Age civilization wondering how those people are moving so fast with those circle thingies on the ground that are, their wheels. And so to me, that's keeping our imaginations open is the greatest thing. And I think that for me, it's not about what I believe, it's what I can disprove. And so I'm going along and checking things off because I want to figure out what the hell this thing is. And the best way to do that is to strike through the stuff that it's not.
Well, to tie that thing together with a nice little ribbon at the end, must be an exciting week for you in the event of the idea that the Patterson-Gimlin film is something that maybe we can close the damn book on. And like you were saying, finally be able to kind of move forward. Let's put our effort, our energy, our knowledge, our intelligence as optimally put towards the things that we possibly can. Let's move forward, goddammit. I am going to play the ending music for Ghosts in the Mountains, but that doesn't mean that this is all just said and done, because who knows where we're going to go with this thing. But that said, if you are a Patreon subscriber, wow, thanks! We really appreciate you giving your monetary compensation to us because you like what we're doing. Holy shit, that means a ton. You are going to hear more from this incredible panel that we have here tonight on the Midnight Broadcast. But that said, we would like to thank, number one, Micah Hanks for helping launch this damn podcast and just sending along this frickin' show to all of his listeners, because the people that have come to us through your listenership have been wonderful. They are smart as shit. They are very supportive, and God almighty, we cannot thank you and them enough for embracing our little podcast here. The Dr. Captain and I, we pour a creamy fucking pint for all of you all the time. So that said, I would like to thank Micah Hanks, Jon Kaufman, the Dr. Captain Burgess. See you in another life, brother. See you in another episode. Thank you all so much. If you want to know more about what we do, please go to ghostinthemountains.com. You can email us at ghostinthemountains@gmail.com. You can support us on Patreon. And that said, thank you for listening, and stay spooky, everybody.
How you doing, little buddy?
Micah, what? Why? Just
You just like hanging out with those little beaver friends. Micah, Jesus, this beaver is like taking over your mind.
Happens.
Micah, he doesn't even want to speak. The beaver has completely taken him over.
13-year-old boy. Edit that.
What the hell is even happening? I'm trying to give these people a keister egg, and Micah's just like not speaking and puppeting a damn beaver.
Was I supposed to be speaking? I thought
It's a keister egg.
I thought you were talking to the the beaver.
Come here, beaver. Give me the beaver.
Beaver, no, you be good to the little beaver.
I'm not going to
buddy.
hurt him.
Be kind to him.
What would you like to say on the mic, Bucky?
One thing.
All right, go for it, Bucky.
Bring it after midnight. A Sasquatch ate my dog.
See, Bucky gets it.
He can
All right,
sing, man.
there's your damn keister egg. We will be back with the midnight broadcast. Good night, everybody.